Okay, good afternoon sa atong tanan. So here we are again with our public webinars from the TLRC. As you might have remembered, TLRC is here for the whole of 2021 to deliver to you public webinars that are essential for not only teachers, also students, as well to the general public. Today, we will be having a rerun of one of the most viewed webinar that we have last year, and that is research ethics for teachers and students. Today, I stand not as the coordinator of the Teaching and Learning Resource Center, but as your host for this afternoon's event. I do hope hindi niyo ako na-miss. For those who are, yes, you miss me. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sir Dan. Diyan si Sir Dan. So before we start the program, let's have a short introduction or message coming from our new TLRC, Teaching and Learning Resource Center Coordinator. And I do hope you will love her as well, just as much as you loved me before. So please help me welcome Dr. Natividad Estelore. Big hand for her.
Thank you, Professor Jera, for that warm introduction. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this year's first webinar of UP Cebu Teaching Learning Resource Center. On behalf of the UP Cebu TLRC team, I would like to thank all the teachers, students, and other guests for gracing this event. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of Professor Magnolia Laos, our resource speaker for this afternoon. As part of its mission, UP Cebu TLRC organizes a series of webinars on topics that are relevant and helpful in the enhancement of teaching and learning process. This afternoon's webinar aims to help participants gain knowledge and insights on the ethical principles that one needs to know or needs to follow when doing research. And before I end my welcome speech, please allow me to express my heartfelt gratitude to the following. The TLRC staff, Mr. Michael Andrew Valoria and Ms. Noel Seno for doing their job very well, and especially in the preparation for the webinar series. And also, most especially to Professor Geraldine Gomala, our former TLRC coordinator, for her continued support. Okay, once again, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you for making this event possible.
Thank you so much, Doc Nati. Doc Nati is actually one of my favorite teacher in mathematics way back when I was still in college. And Doc Nati actually took in this very huge task of being the new coordinator of the Teaching and Learning Resource Center. Again, delivering to you information and relevant lectures as well as webinars for teachers, students, and everyone else who still wanted to learn more. Now, before we start, let me call on Noel for the webinar netiquettes.
Thank you, Ms. Gerald. Good afternoon, everyone, and here are your webinar reminders. So please take note of the following. So this webinar will be recorded. We will be keeping tab of the proceedings for this webinar for documentation purposes. So you are free to leave if you feel uncomfortable that this session will be recorded. And please mute your microphone during the talk. We want to make sure that the speaker's voice is clear to everyone, and we may opt to remove you if you don't follow this request. Also refrain from taking pictures or videos of the talk. If you do so, you will be held accountable of data privacy violations if the copy you created leaks into other internet outlets. We wish to keep the identity of our participants private, so as yours as well. And if you have questions while the talk is ongoing, you may put them in the Q&A box. After the talk, you will have a chance to ask your questions. So we wish for you to only use the Q&A box rather than voice because of our time constraint. And don't forget to evaluate your inputs on the webinar will help us improve our next webinars. After you have answered the forms, you will be given a proof of participation. The evaluation link will be opened right after the webinar and shall remain open for only 10 minutes. Our webinar is currently live streaming on our YouTube channel, LRC UP Cebu. For those watching through our YouTube channel, you will get your proof of participation by staying until the end of the session, and we will be announcing the instructions at the live chat, so please stay tuned. And if you want to get updated with our future webinar and trainings, you can follow and contact us on these platforms. Teaching and Learning Resource Center, University of the Philippines, Cebu, that is our official Facebook page. And for our YouTube channel, we have TLRC UP Cebu. And for our website, tlrc.upcebu.edu.ph. And for our email, you may send us an email at lrc.upcebu@up.edu.ph. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Noel. Before I call on Michael, I would like to say or to give a shout out to all our participants from Batanes hanggang Hulo po tayo. So we have participants coming from Aklan State University, hi po dyan, from Banga campus. And then from Negros Oriental State University in Gihulngan. Also, we have our fellow UPians coming from UP Diliman. Hi po dyan at the Department of Chemical Engineering. Thank you so much for being with us as well. And also coming from Tawi-Tawi Regional Agricultural College. Thank you so much. Ang layo po talaga. But then, because of the technology that we have today, we are able to come together and learn something new. And I hope you will learn a lot from our speaker today. Speaking of speaker, Michael, I would like to give the floor to you so that you can introduce to us our speaker.
Hi, so again, good afternoon, and it is my honor to introduce our resource speaker this afternoon. She is a graduate of Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Master of Education, major in Social Studies from the University of the Philippines, Cebu, where she currently teaches social science, economics, and research courses at the UP High School and Master of Education programs. Her research interests include bullying, education, politics of education, and education evaluation. Moreover, she is also the secretary of the UP Cebu Research Ethics Committee. Everyone, let us welcome Professor Magnolia Laos. Good afternoon, Professor.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Nakaka-conscious from from north to south. Anyways, this is a rerun, as I have, as Ms. Chera have mentioned earlier. This is a rerun of the webinar we had last year when, unfortunately, there was a brownout, which I think the open forum was cut short. So I will be sharing with you the basic in research ethics from the point of view of a teacher who is currently teaching research in high school and as well as in a graduate school, and a member of the Research Ethics Committee and sitting as a secretary of the Research Ethics Committee of the UP Cebu. Okay. Wait, let me share my screen first. While let me start. So when I attended the research ethics training, it took us the first research ethics training that I attended was around 3 or 4 days. But I will try to discuss the basic in 1 hour and a half or for most, so that we will have basically an idea of what research ethics is. Okay, so before I proceed, I will be discussing in a nutshell. No, I will be discussing what research ethics is, why we should be conscious about conducting ethical researches, and how do we make our research ethical. So I will be discussing in a nutshell this aspect. But before I go to what, how many of you have received this one in your cell phone? In the RRMC text, when we have rain, or we have typhoon or any weather disturbances. Okay, I think everyone can receive the NDRRMC text. How about the second one? I received that one. Good day, my dear. I have proposal for you. I did not open. What is that for? So you also received that one. So which among the four did you feel that you were violated? Your privacy was violated. Did you feel violated when in the RRMC warned you about rain, about flooding? No? So yung 2 to 4. So basically, when I received this text, my question is, where did they get my number? How did they get my number? Because I did not, this especially the 2, 3, and 4. By the way, number 1 is, I think there is a law for that, wherein the telecom is mandated to send text about weather disturbance warning. Okay, so the 2, 3, and 4, the question is, where did they get my number and how did they get my number? Napakagaling naman ng mga researchers na to. No? So I feel violated whenever I receive this text, and I myself I took it upon myself to report this to NTC if I receive this kind of text, but unfortunately wala pa silang sagot. Anyway, so this is basically, I show this basically, this is because it's a part of in conducting research. Now we had to be very careful of what data should we get and how do we see to it that we don't violate the privacy of the person. Okay, so let me proceed. When we conduct research is very important. No, we are all researchers. I hope, because that's the common interest of the group now. It's a process of discovering new knowledge. Okay, so it involves a systematic investigation. It's systematic process from gathering the data to analysis of information that you gathered, to design to develop, to contribute to what is called generalizable knowledge. Okay, so basically, when we conduct research, we answer a certain question or we answer a certain phenomenon or problem. So we pose a question, that's the first one, we ask the question, and in teaching research, the first step is how to ask the right question. Okay, then we collect the data to answer the questions that we ask, then we present the answer to our question. So that is research. But in academic, we go further into testing the hypothesis, doing statistical treatment that could find to prove relationship of variables that we use. So when we conduct research, it's very important. The research is important because we add to knowledge. Okay? We add to knowledge. We also improve, research also improve practice. Okay? It improve practice. So, for example, in teaching, we test a certain strategy in order to improve our classroom, our teaching or teaching strategy. So it improved practice. It also helped us improve quality of life. Without those vaccines, our lifespan today, the human being lifespan is very short. And because of research, our scientists develop vaccines which improve the quality of life and increase the lifespan and increase the welfare of the people. Also, research save lives. I think we are, this is quite familiar. This is quite relevant to us, especially that we had COVID. If without the COVID vaccine, I think a lot of lives will be lost in the past 2 years. But we have COVID vaccine that generally saved us from the worst impact of COVID-19. And also, research give us hope. Hope to act. Okay? Yun. Now, there are two types of research. One is the research that doesn't involve human beings. So yung non-humans ang subject, or it doesn't involve human participation. So for example, it's pure physics or pure math, biomedical or behavioral researches also which involves animals, though it benefits the human being, but in the process of the conduct of research, it doesn't involve human participation. The second one is the research that involved human participation. The second one is the concern of research ethics. Okay, so this is our concern, the research which involves human participation. Pero ngayon, no, yung sa research, like if you involve animals in research, there is also the animal, how do you call that? The animal welfare mga groups na that protect or see to it that the welfare of the animals are not violated also. Okay, so research that involves human beings are not only in social sciences, it could also be in the biomedical, epidemiological activity that entails, again, a systematic collection or data analysis, which the intention is to create new knowledge which human beings are exposed. So in the process of collecting data, experimentation, human beings are exposed, including to manipulation, intervention, and observation, and interaction of investigation are directly. So you are either indirectly or there is an alteration, like for example, research that involves human experimentation. So hindi naman direct yung contact with the participants, but that is also part of research that involve human participation. So in this case, your subject or your participants becomes individually identifiable by the investigator or the researcher in the collection, preparation, or the use of any material, biological or medical material, or other records. So in this case, it refers to research which involve human beings, which again, as I mentioned, is the concern of research ethics. Okay, so when we say ethics, it involves our moral behavior, our concept of what is right and wrong, and it is a system of belief that control our behavior. As applied in ethics, in research rather, it is a framework which, and when applied, includes broad ethical principles that make us responsible as researcher to conduct the research that to the responsible conduct of research and the use, not only in the conducting of the research, but also the use of the outcome. So researchers, investigators are responsible in the conduct as well as in presenting or in sharing the outcome of research. So the focus of ethics in research is the participants, or how do you call it, respondents. Okay, respondents if it's not experimental, but if we use experimental research, we call it subjects or participants. So depende po kung anong ginagamit nyo sa proposal or sa research nyo. Okay, so we focus on the human participants, and also we consider in ethics the community and the environment. So let's say, for example, a particular proposal or a particular research study would benefit the individual, but it is harmful to the environment. So it is also the ethical, no, the ethical conduct of that research is also in question. So it doesn't end with the human participants, but also consider the community as well as the environment. Okay, now here are the terms that is commonly used in research. So we have researcher. Okay, researcher, this is the scientist, the qualified researcher, the qualified scientist who undertake the responsibility for scientific and ethical integrity of a research at a specific site. Okay, you can be a researcher conducting social science research, a social scientist, or in the hard science, it's science and math. You can also be in general, you are a researcher or a scientist. In clinical trial or in biomedical research, their term is investigator. Okay, so it's responsible for the conduct of the trial at the trial site. So the person is called the investigator. And in the conduct of the research, we usually, if we can afford it, we usually hire collectors or enumerators of data or data gatherers. They are called technicians. Okay, so technicians. So in ethics, the responsibility or the burden of the research to be conducted ethically primarily is within the responsibility of the researcher and the investigator. My responsibility din yung technician, but the primary burden of the ethical conduct of research ay nasa researcher or in the investigator. Okay. Now, why do we have this research ethics? No? Bakit may research ethics na ang tagal na namang ginagawa yung research? As I've mentioned, there are a lot of discoveries, inventions done by the past scientists, which we benefit now, which improved our quality of life, which increased our lifespan. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it was conducted in an ethical manner. For example, okay, so these were researches conducted by scientists before, which benefited the entire humanity. Like, for example, the vaccine for the smallpox, okay, by Edward Jenner. It was trialed with human participants. Nag-vaccine siya without informing the human subject that what is injected to him or to her was already the vaccine for the smallpox. It was a successful experiment, but it was not ethically done because of that consent. And hindi alam yung participant na he was being experimented. Also, there was this surgery without anesthesia conducted in 1845 by Sims, which the participants, yung inooperahan, hindi siya sinabihan na it will be conducted without anesthesia. And I can just imagine what was the reaction of the patient then. But I think all of these were not ethically done because of lack of consent, or they were not able to inform the participant. But it benefited the humanity until now. Like, for example, the vaccine for rabies, the vaccine for yellow fever, which was actually experimented in the Philippines at the turn of, when the Americans came at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. Then we have also, the most famous actually is the Nachi experiment on human endurance, which led to the formulation of the Nuremberg Code in 1947, which became the basis of many research ethics document that we have now. So what happens then in the Nachi experiment? Okay? In the Nachi experiment from 1942 to 1945, the regime of Hitler conducted 3 types of experiment in concentration camps where they held the prisoners, the prisoners of war. So one big research was on the survival of military personnel. Okay, so the endurance of military personnel. They tested the limits of human being. For example, they tested the limits of human being in terms of the height. Like they flew a prisoner in an airplane. Tinest nila yung altitude up to what height could a human being endure. Another one is they test vaccines, medicines on the prisoners without telling them that they are being experimented. And the third one is, the third type of experiment is the experiment on the advancement of Nazi racial and ideological goals. So they wanted to try, for example, they experimented if which race will be more can endure more in a particular disease, like for example smallpox. Anong race ba, yung Juba or yung Aryan race yung mas makaka-endure ng particular communicable diseases? So these are part of the researches that was conducted during 1942 to 1945 in Germany, which later on the scientists and the doctors that were involved got penalized, or they were indicted after when it was found out. And it resulted to the Nuremberg Code of 1947, which I mentioned became the basis, the first document about research ethics, or how to conduct ethical researches. Okay, so in general, as I mentioned, the past experiments, the researches in the past benefited the humanity, but they also harmed. Okay, because it was done unethically, they also harmed, particularly our notion for science. That's why we have already this doubt about vaccines. We have this hesitancy about vaccines. Like for example, I think one of the major problem of the COVID-19 vaccine was that a lot of people hesitated to be vaccinated. Okay, because of the Dingvaxia scandal or the Dingvaxia controversy. We're in that, I think that in that particular yung Dingvaxia, and that particular problem is that hindi sinabi lang na it was part still of the clinical trial, no? Yung Dingvaxia. So and it's not that, I think it's not just the Dingvaxia which made people hesitate to accept vaccines now, because marami pang controversy. Like for example, the autism is linked to vaccination in infant, the MMR, which was already debunked. So in this sense, science lost its credibility somehow. So the past tells us that even if there are breakthrough in science and technology, people paid for it. Lives of people paid for it. So in short, good people, these scientists have good intention, but they just acted in a bad way. So there are efforts already in ethical research, okay, this is part of the effort in how to conduct an ethical research, because there are correct ways of doing good research. Even if there is risk involved, there are ways in how to mitigate those risks. Okay, so these are the documents in promoting research ethics. So we have the Beaumont, we have the Bernard, the Germany Nuremberg Code. For social science, we have the UNESCO Conduct of Social Science Research. We have the Belmont Report, was actually amended in 1979. You have the UN Declaration of Human Rights, wherein there is an emphasis on the freedom of the individual for self-determination. And I think many of the universities already have the research code. Like for example, in UP, we have the UP Research Code, which outline how research should be conducted. Okay, so these are documents that guide on how to conduct an ethical research. Why is it important that we conduct an ethical research? Well, for the very simple reason that it is the right thing to do. There is an argument wherein sa mga books, no, is ethics in research a mandatory? Many of the ethicists and the researcher and even the teachers, no, those who are involved in researchers would say that it should not be a mandatory, but ethics should be an option to do right, an option to do good in research. So it's the right thing to do because it protects the participants. The primary concern of a researcher or the investigator is the welfare of the participants. Kaya sinasabi ko palagi sa mga students ko, in writing the proposal, in significance of the study, no? Part yan ng chapter 1, no, the problem, significance of the study. Before you identify the benefit of your study to other people, identify first how your participants, no, will benefit from that study. Dapat number 1 siya. Number 1 in the significance of the study, it should be stated how your participants will benefit from your study. Because as researcher, as an ethical researcher, we have to identify how our participants will benefit from our study. Okay, so it also provides, ethics in research also provides advocates for research participants because we conduct research in an ethical manner. Later on, future researchers will not have hesitancy, no, will not fear of being involved in the research because they will know that there is the called research ethics. Their welfare, their rights will be protected. So hindi kung sa Bisaya padilimot tagam o hindi sila they will not, how do you call that? They will not fear of being involved in the research again because they will know that their rights will be protected by the researcher. So if we will do otherwise, baka wala ng participants na makuha yung ibang researcher. Then ethics is important because we have to look into the rights, safety, and well-being of our participants, which is our primary concern. And it also, especially now, if you want to publish your research, many of the journals would always ask for your research ethics. If you have clearance, no, because it ensures that your research is credible, meaning it is scientifically done and it is ethically done. Because later on, when we in the discussion, what is an ethically conducted research? An ethically conducted first is it has to be scientific. Your procedure should be scientifically sound, but not all scientifically conducted researches are ethically done. So, but all ethically done researches are scientifically sound. So requirement po ng ethical research is yung scientific soundness. So when we review protocols or proposal, we see to it that we review first the procedure. If correct, then we review how the proponent will protect the human participants. Ito yun yung ethic part of the research. So scientific soundness, then ethical soundness will follow. So credibility, trust, and accountability is actually being promoted when we conduct research ethics. So we are accountable as a researcher, but when we conduct an ethical research, we get the consent of our participants, we share the accountability, hindi lang yung researcher ang accountable, but we share the accountability with our participants also. So it reduces now liability, waste of time and resources, which turns into useless, harmful, and worthless research if we don't conduct it ethically. Okay? Okay, so these are the components of an ethical research. Number one, it has to be for the good of the person. Okay, the social value, we have to identify the social value. Palagi kong sinasabi sa mga students ko when they make their statement of the problem. At the end, if you know that a certain variable is related to what is the implication? What is the use of your research? Paano mo siya gagamitin for what is that for? Di ba? Palagi yun yung higher na purpose ng research. You don't end just identifying the relationship of variables to one variable to another variable, but the end of research for me as a social science teacher and as a teacher in research also is the end of research. The ultimate end of research is to find or to contribute to solutions to social problems. No? So dapat may social value yung research natin. Then second, yung sinasabi kong scientific soundness. A good research, no? A scientifically sound research is always hypothesis driven. May hypothesis ka. May nakita kang phenomenon, you want to test. Parang yung ginawa ni Newton, no? Yung Newton's law. Kita niya yung, I don't know if it's really apple that falls from the tree, but from that observation, gumawa siya ng hypothesis, then experiment, and then later on it becomes a Newton's law. So scientifically sound researches are hypothesis driven. You ask a question, you observe, then you ask a question, then it prompts you to conduct an experiment. Then we don't, as I mentioned, we don't end with scientific soundness. It has to be ethical. So there has to be procedures that follow and protect the human participants. The researcher should also be competent. So wag tayong gagawa or magpropose ng research na tayo mismo ay hindi confident to conduct that research, because the danger is that you may not properly, you may not properly understand the information that we get. You may not properly appreciate the information that you get. And worse is, baka mamali pa yung analysis mo. And that is not an ethical, that is not the behavior of an ethical researcher. So we have to conduct a research where we are confident that we can pull it off. No? Magagawa natin ng maayos at tama. Yung sinasabi. Then it also, itong sinasabi natin na community involvement. Mahina yung audio ko. Sorry po. Let's see. Okay. Okay na ba?
I think okay lang po yung audio, miss.
Okay.
I think it's on the case of the network connection siguro sa ating audience.
Okay, sige. Akala ko yung audio ko yung mahina. Okay, so yun yung component ng ethical research. Now, ano yung mga principles na dapat nating malaman or dapat nating take up when we conduct an ethical research? There are only two, no? Respect for the person. The person which, ang human participants natin, the person's right for the self-determination, meaning to be able to decide for his or her own welfare, and the person's right for privacy. Ito yung protection of or respect for the human person. Kaya nga sinasabi ko niya, did you feel violated when you receive those texts asking you to log on, or those texts that especially ngayon, no, yung campaign period, campaigning for persons. So ako, I feel violated because I feel ko na breach yung privacy of where did they get my number, my personal number. So in the conduct of ethical research, we have to see to it that we respect the person's right for self-determination free will, yung sinasabi natin free will to decide, and free will and respect of the person's right for privacy. And second one is justice. Okay? Yung sinasabi nating justice, what is just what is just for everyone. So this will include later on when I discuss the informed consent, the inclusion and exclusion of participants. Yung pag-identify ba natin ng who will participate in your study, you consider that others may also benefit from your study pero hindi mo kinuha as respondent, or did you include people that is not actually beneficial, that will actually not directly benefit from your study. So as researcher, we try to be just. No, we try to be fair to everyone. Okay, when ethical researchers regard participants as a person with inherent dignity, so a person with has a right for the self-determination or free will. So yung tinasabi natin dito, yung as researcher, we have to identify how our participants will benefit from the research. As I mentioned kanina, dapat ipapa-identify natin yan sa mga students. First, significance of the study, how your participants will benefit from your study. Secondary na yung ibang sector. Okay? So how your participants will benefit to yung beneficence, yung principles of non-maleficence, parang Hippocratic code. Our rule as researcher is to protect the human participants. So do no harm. Okay? Yung beneficence, benefit. There may be risk. There may be risk involved in participating in the research, but the risk is outweighed by the benefit. Baka may risk nga, like for example, yung COVID vaccine. Di ba pinapasign tayo ng consent? There are risks involved, but in overall, yung risk involved is outweighed by the benefit. So ito yung principles of beneficence. Yung non-maleficence is the number one rule, do no harm. Don't expose your participants to unnecessary risk. If there are risks involved, dapat ma-outweigh siya ng benefit. Pero kung mas malaki ang risk kaysa sa benefit, huwag gawin. Yun yung rule of thumb. Then respect the person's autonomy. Okay? It has to be voluntary. Participation in a research has to be voluntary. The person has the right to withdraw in any stage of your research. Kahit nakapag-answer na siya ng survey, na-interview mo na siya, na-process mo na yung data, but at the end, the person will say, I want to withdraw. I don't want to take part of your research anymore. That should be allowed without question. Kahit nagbigay na siya, nag-sign na siya ng consent form. And again, the last one is equal to other person. Ito yung involvement in the inclusion and exclusion in the identification of your participants. Okay? Beneficence, yun. The benefit should outweigh the risk, then maleficence, do no harm. Okay? Ito yung first na na dapat na tinatandaan ng researcher. Okay, what are the risks involved in research, especially if it involves human participation? Physical. So maybe the conduct of the researcher participants will get hurt physically. Baka mabalian ng buto, baka baka masugatan. So this has to be anticipated. Okay, it has to be identified in the proposal. What are the anticipated risks so that you can mitigate the risk? It could also be psychological. Okay, as a teacher in research, I don't usually allow my students, especially high school students, to research on mental health. Kasi baka in the process of data gathering, in the process of the research, they would self-diagnose themselves. Or baka in the process of data gathering, for example, may in-interview sila na medyo may problema on mental health, mag-breakdown, then the researcher would not know how to handle that, then that would be unethical. Okay? If we allow researchers or students to conduct that particular sensitive topic, no, we have to ensure that we can readily respond to whatever happens during the conduct of the research. So usually kung nag-aalaw kami ng mental health, no, na topics, parang minamandate yung researchers to bring with him or with her counselor, or magpro-process if just in case there is somebody will have breakdown during the conduct of the research, or even if the researcher himself or herself will have a breakdown. So yung psychological effect, so yung ina-anticipate din natin. Then there are social risks. For example, hindi naman sana, no? In the conduct of research, biglang nag-away yung mother at saka yung anak. Tapos naging magulo yung household, or because of conducting your research on gender equality or empowerment of women, na-realize ng babae na gusto niyang makipaghiwalay. Though we try in the feminist, no, in the feminist point of view, we try to raise awareness, but it has to be anticipated, no? As a researcher, it has to be anticipated if there are social risks involved. And the economic risk, if in the conduct of the research, for example, the employee will lose his or her job, or mapapagalitan siya ng manager, no? Or other things like that, or mawawala yung, like for example, I have a student now, grade 12 student. They are conducting a research on the perception of the vendors on the plan to develop the carbon market. So many times they had difficulty in gathering data, in interviewing, because for so many times they were refused because the vendors, the participants, the respondents, feared that they will lose their stalls, no, yung place nila sa market if they participate in the interview. So yun yung mga economics. So I told them na don't force them, it's their right. So hanap kayo ng iba na papayag na maging respondent. Okay, now what are the ways to conduct ethical research? Number one is we have to minimize the risk of harm. If there are risks, we have to minimize. We have to mitigate the risk. We have to manage the risk. And how do we manage the risk? One way of managing the risk is we have to obtain the informed consent. Okay? Obtain the informed consent from the participants. I will discuss this in details later on. Then we have to protect, as researcher, we have the responsibility to protect the anonymity and confidentiality of your participants. There are ways to do that, especially now that we are in the digital age. There is a very particular, madaling ma-violate yung anonymity at confidentiality ng data, especially that we are now in digital age. One way of minimizing risk in conducting research now that we are in digital, especially in online, do not ask information from your respondents that you don't need now. Like for example, in your research, you don't need the person's telephone number. Baka as researchers sasabihin mo, maybe I will need it in the future. But now you don't need it. You don't ask for that now because that's already risky. Or you don't need the researcher's age, no? In your study, hindi siya part ng variable. You don't ask that particular data. So may tinatawag ngayon sa digital ethics in digital age, conducting research in digital age is you minimization of data or information to avoid baka may breach, may accidental leak of your data. At least wala doon yung mga personal data. So don't ask for information that you don't need for your study. Okay? Then we have to avoid deceptive practices. Walang mga covert researches. Dapat sinasabi, pinapaalam that you are conducting a research. Except lang, may sinasabi silang na exception, except that if that research would involve exposing the researcher to risk also. Like for example, you are conducting the research on a cult, kanang mga religious cult na it would risk your life. That is allowed for certain reason. Tapos may ano siya, may mga conditions na dapat gawin. Okay, so but in general, we have to avoid covert researches. Ito yung danger if you are a teacher as well, yung may nagkakandak ka ng action research, di ba? Teacher ka tapos nagkakandak ka ng action research sa klase mo. So we have to be very conscious about multiple roles as a teacher and as a researcher. So in doing so, hindi ko sinasabi na hindi pwedeng i-conduct. We can do that. We can conduct research in our own classroom. We can do that. But there should be no covert researches or deceptive practices. You have to separate your lesson, yung graded lesson, from your research. So kung nagtitest ka ng effectiveness of a certain strategy or certain materials, magpo-pretest, post-test ka, that you should tell your student that particular activity is not graded, or it will not affect their grade. So walang deceptive na practices. So then the last one is give the participants the right to withdraw. This is in connection also with the right respect for the persons, respect for the person, for right for the self-determination and free will. Okay. Now, how to minimize the risk? Number one, it has to be scientifically sound. Dapat yung procedure ay scientific. Ano nga ba yung characteristic ng scientific? Replicable, systematically done. Yun yung mga characteristics niya, di ba? Pwedeng i-repeat, systematic yung paggagawa, at saka ano pa yung iba? Basta yun yung mga characteristic ng scientific soundness. So the teacher should see to it that from the formulation of the SOP to the interpretation of the data, it has to be appropriate for that particular problem. So yung statistical treatment, dapat appropriate siya for a particular problem para scientifically done siya. Then the risk versus anticipated benefit. No, as I mentioned, beneficence. The risk should be outweighed by the benefits, and the anticipated benefit should be declared in the proposal. So how your participants can benefit from the research should be identified or stated in the proposal. Okay. Then the third one is the free and informed consent. Okay, so scientific soundness, scientific method, as I mentioned, do not expose your participants to unnecessary risk. If mai-expose sila, it is only when appropriate diagnosis or treatment will be done. So for example, yung sa mental health, you really wanted to study on the mental health, there has to be nakaabang na, no, if sinasabi ko, nakaabang na yung if just in case there is a breakdown, may mag-breakdown sa participants, dapat na nakaabang na maproprocess. So there has to be diagnosis or your treatment that can be done just in case there is a risk. Risk would happen to the participants. Gaya din yung ginagawa sa atin sa vaccination, di ba? Every time when we exit after being vaccinated, sinasabi sa atin na here is the number that you can call if you will feel any side effects. Ito yung pag-manage ng risk. Okay. Reasonable risk must be reasonable. Anticipated benefit, if any, to the participants themselves, it has to be declared. Okay. The importance of the knowledge that may be reasonably be expected to the result. So in my experience with my students, if they explain explained comprehensively, clearly to the participants how the research would benefit them, nakakakuha sila ng respondents. Okay? Nakakakuha sila ng respondents. Even if medyo at the start, ayaw ng respondent, ayaw ng mga tao mag-answer ng survey or ng magpa-interview. But if they explain what the research is and how the research would benefit them and the community, pumapayag din. Okay? Then the third one is the free and informed consent. For me, this is the heart of an ethical research. No, we have to do the free and informed consent. Okay, it's a process of informing your participants what the research is all about, and respecting your participants' rights for free will. Okay, individuals who provide informed consent must be legally competent. Dapat yung sinasabi na you have to be in legal age to make decision for yourself. No, you have to be legally competent to decide what is good for you. Yun yung sinasabi ng informed consent. Pero we have participants that below 18 years old, yung legal age. What can you do if that would be our subject or respondents? Okay, informed consent is a continuous process. Hindi lang siya form na may nakasulat doon what the research is all about, what you intend to do, but it's a continued process by which the participants competently, freely, and involuntarily confirm willingness to participate. So, as I mentioned earlier, even if the participants already signed the informed consent, pumunta na siya sa place, nagpa-interview na siya, but later on, at the middle of your interview, nag-decide siya to withdraw. Even if nakasign na siya ng consent, it does not affect his or her right to withdraw. As ethical researcher, we allow participants to withdraw from your research without question. You don't even have to ask, bakit ka mag-withdraw? Di ba ganito? Yun. As ethical researcher, we don't ask question of the reason why the participants would withdraw. Because as I mentioned, informed consent is not just a piece of paper, but it is a continuous process, okay, which gives the participants the right to freely and voluntarily participate in your research. Okay, it's also called an ethical and legal right, or a moral and social legal document. Okay. In the informed consent, we respect the autonomy. If we do the informed consent, the autonomy of the person to decide. We give the person the dignity that he is a human person by not exposing that person to unnecessary risk. We respect the participants as person, as human being, no, not an animal that cannot call out if his or her right is violated, but that person is a human being that has feelings, that have rights, no, that should be afforded with dignity. So yung autonomy and self-determination, the right for autonomy and self-determination of the person should be respected by the researcher. Okay, in the informed consent, there are 4 components. Number 1, that we should ensure is the competence of the researcher. Then the researcher will have full information, magdi-disclose siya what the research is all about. Then nakalagay doon sa informed consent that participation is free and voluntary. Then it should be a form, it should be a document that easily comprehensible. So kung kailangan natin i-translate into the native language, we have to ensure that it is translated. Kasi dapat maintindihan ng participants ano ang risk, ano ang benefit, ano ang risk, at ano ang gagawin nila. Anong expected nilang gagawin in participating in your research. Okay, so there are 3 types of informed consent. Now, one is the consent. Okay, ito yung legal form, consent form na binibigay natin sa mga respondents na 18 years old and above. Okay? So, legal age is 18. These people have already are already legally competent to decide on their own, except if there are may mga limitations, like for example, may mga PWD, no, yung mga differently abled people that could not decide for themselves. So may mga limitations na ganyan. So in informed consent, what is required is the respondent signature, yung participant signature. Okay? Yung assent, ito yung informed consent na binibigay sa respondents na 7 to 17 years old. So in this sense, in our law, they are not still legally of age to decide for themselves. But may right na sila. They have the right to say something, no? Pero hindi lang sila legally of legal age pa. So what is required in an assent is the parent or parents' signature plus the respondent's signature. If you can get both parents' signature, mas maganda. Kasi baka mag-awa, baka magkaiba yung decision ng parent, magka-problema ka pa. Okay? So parent or parent signature is required in an assent plus the respondent's signature. Now, there are also researches that involves respondents below 7 years old. What we get from them is what you call parental consent. Okay? Under the law, yung 7 years old, ang decision making ay nasa parents pa. Okay? So what we require in the parental consent is the parent signature, but we do not disregard also the opinion of the respondent. So verbally, the respondent should say yes to participate in the research. So kailangan kunin yung respondent's opinion. So kailangan natin ng witness na nag-agree yung 7 years old or below to participate in the research. Okay? Now, there are cases na we do not have the document, the written document or the printed document with us, but we are already in the field. You already have the respondents na pumapayag magpa-interview or mag-answer ng survey, but you don't have the written document. Verbal consent is allowed. Okay? Is allowed but not recommended. So in case you get the verbal consent, you explain what the research is all about. You explain that participation is free and voluntary. They have the right to withdraw. What are the benefits and the risks, and what is expected from them as participants of the research. You get the verbal consent if you can have what is needed is witness to corroborate that that person verbally consented to participate in the research. So in case they will challenge later on that they give permission or they give consent to participate, you have a witness to corroborate with your statement. Okay? So yun. What does informed consent means for the participant? They should understand that they are taking part in the research and what is required from them in the research. So you have to provide the detailed information, the potential risk, and the probability, magnitude, and potential harm. Do not hide the harm. Do not hide the potential risk. And if there is a harm or potential risk, what should be done? Okay, what can be done? What is the responsibility? That is the responsibility of the researcher. What should be done in case there is a potential risk? Okay, so researchers should inform the participants in the informed consent the purpose, the duration, the procedure, the right to decline or withdraw, their prospective benefit, their incentives, if there is any. Kung magbibigay ka ng incentive for participation, sometimes we call it, how do you call it? Disturbance fee. Okay, so yun yung incentive ng participation, or you refund them with the with their cost of transportation in participating. So mga ganyan. It has to be declared. Okay. Who the participants can contact if they have questions or if they want to withdraw. Okay. So what is the likelihood of or magnitude, duration of harm and benefit from the participants? That has to be stated in the informed consent. Okay, so ito yung parts. You have to have the title, the principal investigator, affiliation, the contact information of the researcher, the purpose, the introduction of the study, description. Iba ito yung informed consent. Hindi ito yung introductory letter that we usually see in the survey form, yung cover page ng survey form. It has to be a separate form, yung informed consent. You cannot proceed with data gathering without doing the informed consent first. Okay, description of the research, the subject participation, who are the participants of the, para alam niya na, ay tama pala, I should be part of this. Okay, then confidentiality clause. Okay, then the procedure, the participant's responsibility, the risk, the name and the contact person, the name and the contact details of the person to be contacted if they have complaints or grievances on how the research is conducted. And the last one is the most important one. I think is the certificate of consent. Ito. Hindi lang yung form, you have to have a certificate of consent. In the certificate of consent, it is stated there that I have the foregoing information. I read the foregoing information. It has been read to me. I have the opportunity to ask questions about it. And any questions that I ask have been answered satisfactorily. Then consent is voluntary. I have been made to understand that my identity would be anonymized and all the information shared will be kept confidential. I confirm that I have been provided a copy. You have to provide a copy of the informed consent to your participants. Tapos magsasign yung participant, lagay niya yung name, magsasign siya and the date. Do not forget the date because this is the reckoning date. This is very important, just in case my question. Then the date, this is where the shared responsibility start. Okay? Hindi na full, nasa researcher lang yung responsibility, but by consenting to participate and knowing the harm, the possible risk, you share as a researcher, you share the liability with your participant. So importante yung date. Then the certificate of consent is received by, in many cases, I also see witness. Nagpapa-witness pa sila. So kailangan i-identify sino ang nag-receive, signature of the researcher and the date. This is what is kept by the researcher. Ito yung panghahawakan just in case, again, may question sila later on the participation. Then anonymity and confidentiality. Now, it is not only in the gathering of data that we protect the person's identity and we protect the data that we gathered. Throughout the research, the researcher's responsibility in anonymizing or keeping the data confidential should be observed. Okay, so even in the conduct, in the preparation of the proposal, we already remove identifiers. Any characteristics, cues that would identify the researchers. Okay, your respondent. So for example, we don't normally see now, if you will conduct a study in a particular school, we don't normally declare or disclose the name of the school. The name of the school will be redacted. You don't include already location map where the school can be identified. That is already an identifier. Any identifier that would be connected to your respondents. Like, for example, you're conducting a study in a public school in one of the barangay. You did not disclose the name of the school, but you name the barangay. So ilan bang public school ng barangay? Isa lang, di ba? So in that case, because you provided the name of the barangay, you identify the school. Nagiging identifier siya. Or for example, in processing your data, in making your report, sasabihin mo, the oldest person in the school. So if that person can be identified by saying that the oldest person said, that is already identifier, that is unethical. That should be redacted. So dapat ina-aggregate natin yung data, tinatanggal natin yung any cues, no? Any cues or any clues that could identify our respondents. Because as I've said, we have to respect the person's rights for privacy. We have to anonymize, and we have to keep all our details confidential. So what do? We provide proxies, no? We provide pseudonyms. We provide codes for the respondents. Hindi natin dinalagay yung pangalan. Hindi natin dinalagay yung anything that could identify, no? So sa write-ups, we provide codes, we aggregate data in tables. In cases of small groups and characteristics of respondents is identifiable, we lump it. Like for example, age group. Ma-identify yung age group in a certain workplace. Ma-identify natin na maliit lang sila. Dalawa lang silang in this particular age bracket. So we collapse them so that it will be aggregated. Then we have to seek permission to access to data. And as possible, conduct the research in a public place. Avoid interview at home because we might be encroaching their privacy, no? So as much as possible, we have to conduct the interview in a public place. Okay? By the way, this particular, how the researcher would protect, no, the data and the confidentiality of the data, no, will have to be stated in the chapter 2 in the research methodology, no, in the proposal. We normally in the research proposal, it would also include now the discussion and the informed consent and the discussion on the data management. Okay, so what data will be shared? It should be redacted. No personal information. Only the data that is redacted data will be shared to the public. The personal information should be kept confidential so that we will not breach the agreement that we had with our respondents. Okay? No, avoid deceptive practice. So yung sinasabi ko kanina na walang covert, wala dapat na covert na mga researches. It has to be declared. Except yung sinasabi ko kanina may yung kailangan, like for example, yung mga religious cult na kailangan mo mag-undercover agent, parang undercover researcher. So, but that if it can be avoided, it should be avoided. I rather err in the side of caution. That's always what my mantra for my students. Err in the side of caution. If you can avoid that, then don't do it. No. Yun yung sinasabi ko lagi. Then the right to withdraw, I always emphasize this with my students. As I mentioned, at any stage, the respondents can withdraw his or her participation, even if natapos. I have this recent case, no, with my students in grad school. Nabigyan siya ng permission to conduct the research. Okay? Ginawa niya. Nag-gather na siya ng data. Gumawa na siya ng report. Naka-chapter 3 na siya. Chapter 4 ginagawa niya. Biglang binawi yung permission. Wala kami nagawa. We have to allow it without question. Otherwise, it's unethical. Kahit mangiyak-ngiyak na siya kasi graduating nga. No? Yung thesis niya, graduating siya. Tapos biglang binawi yung permission to conduct the study. So wala tayong magagawa. That's part of the process of an ethical research. So tinanggal talaga eh. Natapos na yung data processing, tinanggal siya. Kasi wala ka ng permission. We withdraw yung permission. So we cannot coerce or pressure people to participate, especially teachers, no? We recognize the teacher always have the power over the students. Even if we say na, oh, I give my students the free will. But as much as possible, if it can be avoided na hindi ikaw yung mag-conduct na interview, wag na. If pwedeng may third party na mag-conduct na interview, that's better, no? But if hindi siya maa-avoid, ikaw talaga, because ikaw yung teacher, then you have to declare that anything that involves in the research will not affect their grade. Okay, and the students can voluntarily have the free will to participate or not participate in your research. So dapat conscious tayo yung multiple roles na sinasabi ko kanina. Okay? Other research misconduct, we don't fabricate data. Huwag tayong magdoktor ng data. We don't falsify documents. We don't falsify also data. And the third one is, ito yung major crime sa academe. We don't plagiarize. Okay, so ito yung mga misconduct of research. Okay, so I think I've discussed everything. I would like to end with this. Truth is good, but truth with human dignity is better. Okay, thank you very much. Questions?
Okay, thank you so much, Miss Mags. So, our speaker for today is actually part or member, no? Specifically secretary po ng UP Cebu Research Ethics Committee. So, Miss Mags has been there and has already looked at a lot of researches done by students and teachers as well. And they are the ones who actually approves as well as guides and facilitates the research ethics mechanisms under the research umbrella of the university. So, let's continue now with our research ethics forum. So, our topic, research ethics. I know a lot of us here are budding researchers, if I'm not mistaken. So, let's start with some of the questions. There are around 20 questions. Are we okay with this, Miss?
I'll try to answer. I'll try to answer as much as
Okay. We can try to answer as simply as we can so we can accommodate the others. Okay. This is coming from Sir F. Almodiel. For formal and informal research, can a researcher concurrently act as the investigator and technician? If so, what would be the contrast between the multifaceted researcher and someone with only a particular role? Okay, so
pwede naman. Yeah, you can also be the researcher as well as the enumerator, especially if you have limited budget. Okay? But even if you are the enumerator and the researcher, we should not forget that the primary our primary responsibility is to respect the human person. So before we conduct any research, before we gather any data, we have to see to it that we have the informed consent form. We have accomplished the process, no, not just the form. We have accomplished the process of the informed consent, meaning we explain thoroughly what the research is all about. No, we explain the benefits of the research. We explain the possible or potential harm that it can be done to the participants. What is expected of them? What is their responsibility? And what is the responsibility of the researcher as well? No, and it has to be overly emphasized. Kailangan pabalik-balik nating sabihin na participation is voluntary and they can freely withdraw at any point of the research. Yun yung sinasabi natin.
Okay, so for multifaceted researchers, especially sole researchers that are doing their researchers within their classrooms, for example, or within their institutions, it's necessary that you always look back, no, to the basics of research ethics, including consent and willingness to participate of the participants. Thank you so much for that, Ms. Max. Let's go to the next question. Is there a big difference in the degree of ethical consideration between attitudinal surveys and experimental ones? So that is actually the question.
Okay. I think yung comparison dito yung descriptive, no, at saka yung experimental. If it involves human participation, the principle is the same. You have to respect the human participant as a person with the right to self-determination and the principle of justice. So meaning, you have to see to it, you have to identify the inclusion and exclusion participation. So you have to, in the inclusion and exclusion, no, you have to say that you are invited to participate because you are one of the, let's say for example, you're conducting, ito yung naisip ko yung sa student ko, they are conducting a research on how COVID-19 affected the restaurant industry in Cebu City. So they interview restaurant managers, store managers. So dinideclare doon na you are invited to be a participant of the study because number one, you are a store manager or you're a restaurant manager, restaurant owner. So when you participate, you know sinong kasama mo. Diba? Why are you included? At alam mo din sino ang hindi kasama. So yun yung inclusion and exclusion. That is what is justice there. What is the spirit of justice? Kasi baka yung iba, kasama pala sila dapat, no? Pero hindi mo na-include. So, pwede silang, ako din, gusto ko magpa-interview. I am a store owner. So, dapat identified. Thank you.
Okay, so that is the answer for that. And another thing, both surveys and experimental researches need to inform the participants of what they do, what are their rights, and what are the shared rights that they have in the research. Okay, so whether it is experimental or survey only, the same thing follows. So the same concept follows. Okay, next. In the collection of specimen needed for research, if the collection is non-invasive, such as saliva, urine, do we still need a clearance from the ethics board of the school or institution?
Yes. Wala siyang exemption in the ethics if it involves human participation. Actually, yung in-exempt lang, if you conduct prevalence research, like for example, you just go into databases, government databases, like for example, example ng prevalent research namin. COVID-19 cases in relation to ERI data. So, kinukuha lang nila yung mga data from health offices. So, there is no more need for you to go into the informed consent as long as you have the permission of the office that you can access their databases. At saka yung mga meta-researches, yung, di ba yung review of related lit, pwede siyang maging research. You just go into your review work of the previous researches or yung curriculum review. It doesn't involve, it benefits the humanity, but it doesn't involve human participation in the conduct of the research. That is exempted from ethical review. Pero kung may human participation, kahit maliit, ang sinasabi ko, err in the side of caution.
Yes. So dapat understood na yan as long as you take samples from human participants. It is understood that it will undergo research ethics considerations.
If I may add, Jeff, may yung sa confidentiality, may exemption kasi sinasabi ko kanina you cannot share data not unless it's redacted or aggregated. May exemption siya, like for example, in the process of your research, nag-conduct ng HIV/AIDS research, tapos may nakita ka na infected with the disease, we have the responsibility. I think that is in law. We have the responsibility to report it to the DOH or the concerned agency because yung bigger risk doon is if hindi siya ma-reported, baka makapanghawa pa siya. Makahawa pa siya. So, you may danger of breaching the confidentiality, as a researcher, but bigger yung risk na makahawa siya. So, my responsibility, and I think, hindi ko lang sure yung policy about it. It has to be reported in the concern of health of the entire community.
Public safety and health is more prioritized in that case. Okay, thank you so much for that answer, Ms. Miles. So let's move on to the next. Actually, meron ring question dito na almost the same as the other one. For the biological components, again, as long as it takes the data or these samples are taken from human participants, it will still undergo some research ethics considerations. Okay. How about informing the participants of the result of research? Is this also part of the ethical research?
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
yes.
Uh,
So
as a teacher, a teacher, research teacher, no, I always advise my students to share the research result with the respondents primarily. Dapat kailangan nasa top list na makakaalam ng result yung respondent. Other than, dapat secondary na lang yung ma-present mo in an international conference or in local conference. Your primary responsibility as a researcher is to inform your participant of your result. Kung nag-conduct ka ng interview, it is safe that after transcribing, you let your participant review. Kasi baka may nasabi siya na all of a sudden hindi na pala yun, i-retract niya. So we allow that.
okay. So with regards to action research, especially sa ating mga teachers, no, is it necessary to seek written consents if the class is willing to participate? I guess the answer
Yes,
for this
yes,
is definitely yes.
Yes, walang
Again,
exempted.
Walang exempted. Again, it's the protection of your students, if your students are the participants, and your protection as well as the research, as the researcher, no, or the action researcher. So
Yung shared liability and
shared.
responsibility.
Exactly. Okay. So, another question, if the research involves answering survey or set of questions only, where the questions are related to the practice, no, of certain professional, is this subject to securing ethics board clearance as well? I think it's still yes, Ms. Mags, am I right? As long as they take information from individuals.
You at least ginawa ang ano siya. It's not this parang parang hindi naman compulsory na i-subject mo for research ethics review. Oo, kasi may ano siya like we allow some of our, especially sa student researchers, hindi na kailangan research ethics review mo because as a teacher, you are the primary reviewer of ethics. You have to ensure the scientific soundness and the ethical soundness of the research. Kung hindi naman balak i-publish, hindi na kailangan i-research ethics review na ipapas mo sa committee for have it reviewed, but at least ensure that you have the informed consent. Kasi walang exemption doon sa informed consent, basta human participants ang involved.
Okay, so always remember that. So whether it is published or not, informed consent is essential. Okay, regarding the assent, since we already went from informed consent, let's go to assent. What if the minor would like to participate, but the parents won't allow? Or the parents are keen for their kid to participate, but the minor is not. Whose decision takes precedence?
None. It cannot be allowed.
Yes,
Dapat pareho
exactly.
yung decision. Pareho yung kasi di ba yung social risk, baka mag-away later on.
Exactly.
So,
okay, so
none.
dapat positive sila.
Yes.
Pareho si parent, nag-agree si parent, nag-agree rin yung bata. So dapat walang forcibly agreeing dito. Dapat silang dalawa talaga ay nag-agree before you can include them as part of the participants pool. Okay. In paper and pen survey, it is easier to ask respondents to generally affix their signature, no, in the consent form. But what about in online forms?
Okay. What we advise our students to do is to send first the informed consent. Okay? The informed consent with the yung form, tapos dapat ini-explain. Tapos return the informed consent digitally signed. Kung you do it in a Google form, may ways to confirm if nag-consent siya. Like what I normally do as a researcher and teacher as well, if I ask the informed consent, I ask the participants to confirm that he or she understood the information that was written in the informed consent by typing the name and retyping the email address plus the date. Kasi conscious na siya di ba? Hindi na siya, conscious na yung gagawin na pinatype mo yung name, retype mo yung kasi di ba sa Google form, automatic yung email na ko-collect. Pero hindi yun automatic yun hindi yun sign ng consent. You have to ask the participant to retype their email address just to confirm na alam niya yung ginagawa niya and to put in the date. That is enough already as an evidence na nag-consent siya.
There should be some sort of mental processing when they do
conscious.
or conscious
Tapos
processing.
dapat hindi kasama yung survey question or yung instrument. Nauuna yung consent. So after giving the consent, dun mo pa ibibigay yung instrument.
Okay. So as long as in online forms, the individual is conscious in answering, say for example, retyping the name and retyping the email address as well as the date, they are giving their consent. And you can only give the survey as long as nakasign na or nakagive na ng consent yung participant. So make sure consent first before the survey. Okay. So another question. Clinical trial is a research. COVID-19 vaccine is under clinical trial. Those who participated in res vacuna for COVID-19 vax are mostly unmonitored. Some report of side effects, indirect or direct, and cause death that are undocumented. Is this considered unfettered research? Does this vaccine we have now violate ethics in research? At the same time, human rights for some university institutions provide mandatory vaccination card. The facts that it is a clinical trial. Do you have some comments about this?
I think the COVID vaccine is already on the 5th stage of trial, wherein it has already been tried on human participants and it has already been proven safe. Kaya ang taas ng efficacy level niya. Ang minomonitor ngayon is yung bigger, yung effect ng vaccine on a bigger cohort, yung sinasabi natin bigger cohort, which is actually hindi na siya, parang na-proven na siya by scientific way that this is already effective and the risk is very minimal. Yung minomonitor na lang ngayon is yung variation of the effect on a particular cohort groups. So, that's why kailangan pa rin yung consent, di ba? Kailangan pa rin yung consent. Kasi kahit yung ethics yung ethics is, yung sinasabi natin yung ethics is yung basic principle is the respect on the human person's right for self-determination. Kaya hindi siya mandatory, kundi option siya. But we just hope that as researcher, as thinking individuals, we choose the right option. We do it right. If we can do it right, di ba? The same thing with the vaccine. So it's an option to be vaccinated if universities would require vaccination. I think hindi rin naman sinabi ng university that you cannot study online if you're not vaccinated. May option pa rin tayong blended, di ba? Even in the plans of slowly getting into the face-to-face, sinasabi pa rin blended kasi wala pa nandyan pa yung vaccine, nandyan pa rin yung virus. So again, it's the person's free will should be respected.
Okay, so again, that is also a very good comment on this one. If we go back to one of the principles that actually is presented a while ago, the principle is that public health or safety is also a priority. Okay, so that is also one of the things why the COVID-19 is done in such a manner. And right now, the COVID-19 vaccine, is actually being clinically tested and trialed on humans now. So they are already in the 5th stage of trials as of the moment. They are looking at the variations of the responses of different individuals. Again, there will be variations because individuals are created to be different, no? So we are different from each other and we respond to different medicines differently as well. Okay, now, okay, so another question. I do hope that we still have a time. Do we still have a time a bit for this one? Okay. We still have a bit more time. So maraming questions and I'm really happy that they are giving us a lot of questions. And that means a lot of love. So next question. We would like to have an example of information to include under participant selection for informed consent. Do you have an example for that, Miss?
Okay. Informed consent, I'll show you one. Nag-ready ako
Okay.
Nag-ready ako ng sample template ng informed consent. Okay, this is a template that we use in our class in both MEd and master, no? Actually akong gumawa ng template kaya confident ako mag-share. Okay, so this is an informed consent, sample of informed consent. You state the title, then the researcher, the student researcher in this case, then it's in a letter form, dear ma'am and sir. Okay, then you introduce the introduction. They understand the student of the name of the school, is conducting the study, the title of the study, part of the requirement of the course, if it's part of the requirement of the course or it's part of the research, no, whatever is appropriate for you. We are inviting you to voluntarily participate in the study. Tapos, the second part is the purpose, the statement of the purpose of the study. The purpose of the study, the general objective and specific objective. This is part of the SOP, the statement of the problem in your proposal. So you can just summarize the SOP if it's too many, no? Or if you can copy-paste na lang if it's just a little, ilan lang naman. Then the third portion is participant selection. Ito yung inclusion and exclusion. You are being invited to take part in this research because your knowledge and opinion can contribute to further understanding what is the overview of the study. You qualify to participate in the research in your capacity, which is enumerated below. As a student or teacher, kung yun yung mga respondent mo, or as a school administrator, if your study involved education research, no? Kung ito yung mga participant mo. So, makikita ng respondent yan, sana ko. Am I a student? Am I a teacher or a school administrator? Ito yung inclusion, exclusion. Then, I-emphasize yung voluntary participation. Your participation in this study is entirely voluntary. I consciously put that in bold para mas ma-emphasize. If you decide to participate, you need to sign the consent form. Ito yun yung procedure, no? You are still free to withdraw your participation anytime. During the interview, you can opt not to answer any question you find too intrusive or offensive. Pwede niyang skip. Okay? You do not have to give reason for not responding to any question or for refusing to take part in the interview. So you don't have, bakit ayaw mong sagutin? Hindi dapat ginaganyan. That is unethical. Na your information will not be shared to anyone outside the research project. You may cancel this consent at any time without any reason. Withdrawing from the study means that your participation in the study will end and information will no longer be collected from you. So, i-discard mo siya kung nakapag-gather ka na ng information. Tapos, yung next part is the statement of the risk and benefits. So, the participation in the study has minimal risk, if there is a risk. If in any case you may feel uncomfortable in some of the question, you may opt not to answer. So in this case, your participation in this study, ito yung pagko-convince natin, will help us understand the overview of the study. For example, the extent of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on public schools in Cebu City. It will also the possible outcome, identify the strategies, best way to deliver education and learning in the new normal. So ito yung pang-convince natin na mas mahalaga yung opinion mo. Kailangan mo mag-participate, otherwise you will not be able to shed light on this particular problem or phenomenon. No, then the procedure. If you agree to participate in the study, you will be asked to answer questions related to the topic. The interview will approximately take 10 to 15 minutes. This is important because the participant must know kung kailangan ba siya magpaalam, mag-leave sa trabaho. How long will the participation in your research would take. You will be given a copy of the questionnaire ahead. Kung that's advisable, no? So that you will be able to prepare for the topics that will be discussed. You may answer the question to the best of your ability. Then yung confidentiality clause, we assure that that all data gathered in the interview will be kept at the highest level of confidentiality and will only be used for academic purposes. All personal information of the respondents will be protected and will not be shared. In case of questions or complaints about the research, you may contact. In this case, it's the research advisor because this is part of the academic requirement. So yung advisor has wala siyang other way but to give the number, no, the details, the contact details. Okay. Your approval to participate in the study will be greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time and consideration. Tapos yung researcher's name, email address, and the contact details. Tapos yung second part, ito yung participant's consent, yung sinasabi ko kanina. Yung by signing, ito yung agreement nyo. By signing this consent, ito yung agreement yung sinasabi. Then the consent is received by whom? Kasi yung sinasabi natin, maybe you just hired enumerator. The enumerator will also have to be trained to do the informed consent. So yun. Okay. I hope it helped.
Yeah. So, by the way, Ms. Mags was actually the one who formed or developed that consent form or informed consent. And it is now being used by her students, including her students in the high school as well as in the graduate school. Okay. So, shall we continue? Okay. So, another question. There are some covert researches done by professors, especially in grad school, masking their data as, activities with the course activities. But these would be obvious to the students that they are actually gathering the data. How should we deal with these situations? Maybe as a student, I guess, if that's the case.
Report to the concerned office or refuse to participate.
So generally, report or refuse to participate. Okay. So again, marami ito. I think marami, di ba? Especially
like ako,
for
if my daughter would be asked to participate in a research, nakaka-receive siya ng mga invitation to participate. I'll discuss it with her. So I'll always discuss it with her, and I always tell her that do not answer anything without letting me know. Yun. Kasi para ma-integrate natin yung the conduct of ethical research.
So dapat may there is correct process for that. And even if the professor has, say for example, a very good idea or intention to do that, definitely
there's still a right way to do it. Kasi sabi ko, truth is good, but to have truth with dignity is better.
Yes, exactly. So that's it. So remember that. Okay. Again, on the online setting that we have right now, research surveys are being conducted and with the use of Google Form or any sites. Because of that, there are instances that the respondents could not answer truthfully because we are not on their side during the survey. Is this still safe to use as a data, or this is not reliable?
You have, as a researcher, you have the best, you are the best judge if that data is reliable. Pero ako naman, as a researcher, I always do it in good faith, that my respondents will be truthful. Tapos in answering the questions. Tapos mahahalata mo rin naman if hindi nila sineryoso yung yung pag-answer ng question. Mahahalata mo yan sa pag-process ng data. Then maybe you can do a follow-up activity or follow-up survey. Or pwede kang mag-conduct ng, let's say, focus group discussion to deal on that particular area na medyo hindi truthful or nagda-doubt ka na truthful. Ito yung mga paggamit ng mga mga triangulation na methodology.
Validating methodologies natin. Okay, so that includes focus group discussion, one-on-one interview later on, no, to validate the data. Another strategy, I think, Ms. Mags, that I can actually give this researcher is to make sure that you tell your respondent how much time it would take to answer the survey.
Yes. It has to be in the informed consent. Kasi para maka-prepare siya, like if it would take them 2 hours to answer the survey, at least maka-prepare siya. Hindi siya magmamadali, hindi siya sasabihin, may ka-date pala ako in the next 30 minutes. Kailangan ko matapos. So, at least may right to refuse siya. So, it has to be declared.
Yes. And another thing, if your Google form or your questions are not well created or developed, then it would be not easy for the participants to actually answer. So you have to make sure that your questions or your surveys are clear and
Tested.
and pilot tested. And it's also readable to their age and their
scientific soundness first before ethical.
Exactly.
Yes.
So that will erase the problem of not being truthful. Okay, so another one. Let's have another question. Okay, is it considered unethical for the researchers to ask more than once? I think the idea here, Ms. Mags, is that when you try to collect the participants, no? For instance, sending email every day, asking them to participate on the said research. Is it unethical to do so?
Depende kasi if you will be the respondent, would you feel already uncomfortable na kinukulit ka? I think that should be the rule. Kung ikaw mismo gagawin yan sa'yo, uncomfortable ka na, wag mong gawin sa respondent mo. Yung ganon. Kasi it will violate their pressuring them to participate sa pagkakukulit mo, na-pressure na sila. Your data will be compromised also. Your data will be compromised.
Okay. Ito merong very important question, I think, no? How long will the researcher keep, for example, an audio recording of the interview for a qualitative study, for example? Ano po ba yung ideal duration of keeping the data?
Okay. Yung data can be kept up to between 2 to 5 years, but it should be the redacted data. Okay? The redacted data. If you yung rule kasi, yung redacted data can be shared. Kasi hindi naman dapat repeat yung research. You be build on to minimize waste of resources. So it should be shared, yung redacted data. But yung may data with personal details, like for example, yung questionnaire na may contact number nila, address nila doon, it should be purged the moment that you don't need it already. Okay? So pwede mong i-keep yung data yung redacted data between 2 to 5 years, but yung my personal details, it should be purged. The moment na process mo na, natapos mo na yung research. Dapat pinipurge siya. Even if it's online, ito yung mga digitally collected data. Dapat may effort to purge the digital data. So yung mga conversation online, dapat dinidelete yan.
Okay, so again, nakalagay yan kasi sa data management ng mga data na binigay. Yeah. So make sure that you purge the data when you don't need it already. And there must be reduction of the data that you are actually processing. So do not forget about that.
Tinatanggal
Okay.
natin yung identifiers, yung sinasabing identifiers.
So we are actually down to our last two questions. I'm very sorry if hindi po natin ma-accommodate lahat ng question. But I will just be picking out two of the things, two questions that might be of interest for everybody. Traditionally, giving incentives is considered as a violation in ethics since it can condition or affect the response of the participants. How can we ensure ethics in cases when we have to give incentives to the participants?
Okay. In general, hindi natin, kasi magiging precedent siya, no? Pag binibigyan natin ng malaking incentive, and it is detrimental to the future researchers. But wala namang hard and fast rule in giving incentives. If you can give, like for example, dinistorb mo siya ng half day, nag-leave siya ng half day sa work, I think it's very ethical for us to give incentives. If pinatravel mo siya, gumastos siya, I think it's ethical for us to reimburse the travel cost. Oo. Kasi hindi mo i-burden yung respondent mo. It would also result to research fatigue pag nabuburden sila. Na nag-participate na nga sila pa yung abonado. Oo. So, at least if you have the budget to incentivize, no? Like for example, nag-FGD ka, pinakain mo, that is already an incentive. And that it's not harmful in the conduct of the research. It's still considered ethical. Hindi naman siya next time, dapat lechon na ipakain sa amin ngayon kasi nag-lechon manok kami. Hindi naman gano'n, no? So, as much as possible, we try to balance in giving incentive that it would not be a precedent or it would not be detrimental to the future researcher. So, kaya yung sinasabi ko nga sa mga students ko, if you did, at least you took more than 2 hours of their time in participating in your research, it is already your responsibility to give some incentives.
So again, discomfort yun on the side.
Tsaka time yun na ginugol.
Exactly. So again, it's okay to give incentives or yung parang reimbursement on the, because they do stuff for you. So you have to reimburse some of the discomforts that actually occurred. Okay, and this last question. So research misconducts in university are actually occurring, and in the formulation of research ethics, what would you suggest on the penalties or actions for researchers who committed research misconducts? And if there is no existing institutional research ethics board, will it be enough that a disclaimer be placed in the preparatory pages of the manuscripts of the study conducted that they apply the principles of ethics in research?
Okay. As I've mentioned earlier, not all naman kailangan mo ethics review. Especially if you're a student, yung mga student researchers naman, minimal risk yan basta hindi nag-experiment, nag-amateur, and minimal risk yan. As a teacher, you are the judge if it's a minimal risk or not. If tingin mo naman minimal risk, may informed consent, naka-declare doon sa proposal how they will manage the data, yung confidentiality and anonymity, it doesn't necessarily be subjected to ethics review by a formal research ethics reviewer. The teacher, the advisor can give already the clearance. For so many times I give clearance already, research clearance for my students kasi minimal risk. Now, if you are the teacher, tapos tingin mo, okay, ito yung risk na hindi ako sure na minimal pa. Ako as a teacher, I would be the one to recommend for an ethics review. Okay? Kung hindi sa school, walang ethics review board or committee ang school, there are other schools that accept review of protocols from other researchers. So, pwede mong, just to make sure na na-review from a different person, no? Na-review from the different person na tama ba yung ginagawa? Tsaka na-mitigate ba yung possible harm? Na-mitigate ba yung risk? Kasi you cannot wash hands na ay, hindi naman akong researcher, ikaw yung teacher. At saka yung, di ba, it doesn't just involve the researcher and the participant. It involves the community. We have to help that researchers has to be ethically done because there is no other way but the right way to do it.
Okay, with regards to sanction, Miss, I think on this case, it would be a legal matter. So if you do harm to your participants, law will proceed.
At saka ano
Exactly.
siya, conscience siya eh, di ba?
Exactly. Law will proceed.
Konsensya ka, hahabulin ka rin at the end.
Hahabulin ka rin in the end.
Not in this lifetime, in another lifetime, maybe.
Okay, so remember, when it comes to researches, we stay true with the medical field's prenum non nocere, which means the first thing to do is do no harm.
Yes.
Okay, so exactly, I think that's the end of our forum.
Thank you. I hope.
Thank you so much for that. As a rejoinder, unethical research is scientifically sound, and the research that is ethical knows what it needs from the participants, protect the rights of its participants, and protects the data that the participants has handed over to you. And ethical research allows communication and promotes credibility and does not exploit its participants. And again, minimizing the risk, having informed consent and assent, and allowing our participants to have a equal rights, as they willingly participate with our researches is very important for ethical research. And again, it's not only for your protection, but also the protection of the participants who are humans just like us as well. Okay, so before anything else, may I call on Miss Nati, Dr. Nati, to give the certificate to our speaker for today, Miss Magnolia Labs.
Good afternoon once again. I would like to present, or in behalf of the TLRC, I would like to present the certificate of recognition to, let me just read. Certificate of recognition is proudly given to Professor Magnolia A. Laos for sharing her invaluable time and expertise being the resource speaker on the webinar Research Ethics for Teachers and Students on April 27, 2022 via Zoom. Given this 27 of April 2022 at the UT Cebu, Lahog, Cebu City. Signed, Natividad Virginia Esteriore, TLRC Coordinator.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mas.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mas.
Thank you. I hope I was able to share information that is very enough.
Actually, this one is blockbuster again.
Thank you.
Okay, I would like to shout out Ms. Mags. We have so many participants right now coming from Davao, Kidapawan, Negros, down to Zamboanga, Batanes, Baliwag, Binyan, Siargao, Cavite, San Fernando, and of course, way there in Bangkok. Okay,
Wow.
International Puto. Okay.
So
before anything else, let's have our evaluation reminders. Our evaluation and processing of e-certificates are actually automated. So please make sure to type in the correct spelling of your name since this will reflect on your certificate. So if you might have C, Noel and Michael were giving you the evaluation link a while ago. Also, please be mindful in typing your email address because it is where you will receive your certificates. We suggest that you keep a copy of your response in the evaluation for you to verify if you have made mistakes. Kindly make sure that you click send me a copy of my responses before submitting. And normally it takes less than 3 minutes after submitting to receive your certificates. Should you not be able to receive it by 5 p.m. today, just send a reply message with your concern to the confirmation email that were sent through msgalorio@up.edu.ph. We will try to manually send the certificate on the next working day. Okay. Make sure also to remember that the evaluation link is open for only 10 minutes. So make sure that you click directly on the evaluation link and make sure to answer the required fields before 10 minutes ends. Okay, Noel, do we have a couple of programs for the next few weeks? Yes, we have. And this one is for statistics. Statistics for Descriptive Research Design with Application by Professor Maria Salvacion Pantino. And this will be on May 14, 2022 at 1 p.m. Again, I hope you will spend your afternoons with us. Okay? And I think this is the only one for the May. Is it? So far, that's the next segment for our May webinar. So hopefully you'll spend your afternoon with us again. That one is for statistics. And you know what? The thing here is that we have already talked about research. And one of the major thing about research is that it deals with statistics as well. Okay, so I think this would be the end of our public webinar. I do hope that you will stay with us, be our audience for our next webinar. And also, I thank the TLRC team, Michael, Noel, and of course, Dr. Nachi, for having me to host the UP Cebu TLRC webinar, just like before. You know, I miss you a lot also. Okay, Michael, let's play the UP hymn.
Thank you.
Thank you po sa lahat. The evaluation link can be found in the chat box.